Watch this.
A good economy and the ability to produce enough food for our domestic population are also national security issues.
In a world where the movement Farm to Table is supposed to promote the movement of food locally grown to tables, Idaho's lawmakers are focused this week on the farm, specifically on those who work there and their immigration status. Students spend more than 6 hours a day at school, and keeping kids safe while they are there is always a priority. Lawmakers say that when it comes to guns and books, but what about bullying? Their votes say otherwise. Today we're tracing the connection between Boise's most famous boulevard to one of its bleakest moments. How else do you acknowledge when President's Day collides with a day of remembrance?
As far as I understand, every one of my workers is legal to be here. We collect taxes on everybody that works for us. Those taxes are paid to the government, and if there's something wrong with the paperwork, that's on the government side for them to figure it out.
Well, now we know at least the state government is listening to some of that, but they can only solve half this problem. If you recall, the farmer you just heard from was a story we brought to you last October. We showed you how heavily Idaho's ag industry relies on undocumented workers. It's an issue leaders in Idaho agriculture want to solve, but they say it's a two-step process. One, reform the federal work visa program to document immigrants working year-round agriculture jobs. Two, verify all future workers are part of this program or legal U.S. citizens. Now there's a new piece of Idaho legislation skipping straight to step two, which some say causes more problems than it fixes. Here's Andrew Bartline.
The hands behind Idaho's agriculture industry is one of the worst kept secrets in the Idaho State House.
We have a very stable, unauthorized workforce in Idaho.
The Idaho Dairymen's Association and the Idaho Farm Bureau commissioned a study with the University of Idaho. It was to get the best possible numbers.
Good policy follows good data.
And to the best of Idaho's estimation, we have 35,000 undocumented people in the Gem State. Nearly 90% of them are working.
You take them out of the equation, and I don't know where you find 30,000 workers to come fill those jobs in this state.
A reality that agriculture leaders in the state fear they might have to solve.
This is a federal policy issue. The state does not have the authority to grant us visas.
But the state does have the authority to mandate E-Verify. E-Verify is an electronic system to instantly determine a person's legal status to work in the states.
A free program.
Representative Jordan Redmond is pitching legislation to mandate the program for private business.
That adds to Idaho code that employment of illegal aliens is prohibited.
But Idaho's dairy owners and operators say it's missing a step.
There is no visa program that our dairy producers or anybody else that is in year-round agriculture can access to procure a foreign-born worker.
Because the feds don't offer a year-round work visa program, immigrant dairy workers are inherently undocumented. Providing a year-round visa would create legal avenues for the workers. And until we have one, the Dairymen's Association says the state should hold back.
And it's not a complete policy solution.
And that's become clear now to the bill sponsor too.
So that's why currently that bill is being held.
Redmond's concerned about the security of our southern border.
The biggest issue in our country right now.
But not to the point of blindly pushing policy.
Trying to tackle it on the state level or just figure out something we can do. And this is what we have at this point, but I think it does change a little bit.
Because the U of I study shows Idaho is not the first to try and skip straight to step two.
It's problematic in multiple states.
E-Verify mandates in Mississippi, Arizona, South Carolina, and Alabama all led to fewer farm workers.
A good economy and the ability to produce enough food for our domestic population are also national security issues.
It's unclear exactly at this point what a future bill might look like that branches off from the original bill that we talked with Representative Redmond about. But he is pretty serious about something being put in place. He says this is something, Brian, he believes the state can do, and he thinks it's something the state should do, but also those unintended consequences. Wants to stop undocumented people from working in the states. Well, that might hurt our state economy. He doesn't want that to happen. That's not worth it to him. So carve-outs, things of that nature, they're looking through it.
Congressman Mike Simpson addressed that when we talked to him last October about this. Like, if you're ready to pay a lot more for a gallon of milk, then we could solve this right now.
Yeah, and that federal piece is difficult, too, because it is a piece of bipartisan legislation. but it's people in more like urban areas who aren't super interested in it, where the people that represent the rural areas are, which kind of infers than what you would normally think.
It's a never-ending debate. All right, thank you very much, Andrew.
It is our job to protect the children. If we don't, who will?
And that is a question posed by the good senator from Riggins, who was the sponsor on the Senate side of House Bill 314, the library bill, a bill that passed that chamber last session 26-9, only to be vetoed by the governor. But shouldn't that same question be asked when it comes to, say, I don't know, bullying in schools, not just books? Kids getting bullied has become an alarming trend in Idaho schools, driven some to some very dark places because of those interactions at school. And we're talking about violent incidents. That does include suicide. As parents, we're notified of any student situation at school, safety situation at school, from actual lockdowns to just drills. Some lawmakers believe the same should be done when it comes to bullying. Parents should be notified if their kid is the subject of it. But not enough, apparently, right, Joe? I mean, this is probably a pretty interesting debate about this.
Yeah, this was a piece of legislation that was debated today at the Idaho State House, and it was a really good conversation, but big questions on the House floor. I will say, though, House Bill 539, which we're talking about here, it did fail by a slim margin today, but the conversation on it was a centerpiece of the House floor session. So the proposed law would have made it a law for school principals to notify parents or guardians if their student is an aggressor or a victim in a bullying incident at school, or if a student has indicated an inclination for harm to themselves or others. And this actually builds off existing legislation, a law that was passed about 10 years ago. But that notification, they say, must include assistance materials for parents and suicide prevention resources. Supporters of this idea say that it's a no-brainer. Let parents know what is going on so behaviors or issues can be fixed before a dire situation.
For each incident, it would bring us confidence that the districts were providing important pieces of information to all of the parties involved, the bully, the bully's parents, the bullied parents, and specifically that they would be receiving, to quote from the bill, parental empowerment materials, including suicide prevention resources and information on methods to limit students' access to means of harm to self and others. So this bill can help we parents protect our kids by providing us with, for example, examples of conversations that we might want to have with our kids.
So critics of the idea on the House floor, who did again successfully defeat the legislation, they question the effectiveness of the law compared to what already exists.
There's not a definition of bullying in the bill, and when you start using terms and you start saying, well, we're going to develop a definition, it's kind of like, let me pass a law and then I'll develop the rules. And the law is not specific in what the rules are. And so, Mr. Speaker and good ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to be a red light on this one because I think the schools can already do this. If this is a good policy, let them develop that policy. And I don't think we need to pass a law that makes them have to do it. If they think it's a good one, then they should do it.
So we'll see if this concept comes up again. I did reach out to the sponsor, Representative Chris Mathias, did not hear back this evening so far. But again, Brian, there's been a lot of conversations. The Idaho politics world, for example, if you look, the same group of lawmakers, they voted to say, yes, we should have some guns on campus just in case there's an incident. Again, though, this group says that they don't believe that this type of law is what is necessary
As far as the defining of bullying, I mean, why can't it be the same when they talk about obscene materials? That famous phrase, I know it when I see it.
Yeah. That was a conversation, and that was a point made today. So we'll see.
All right. Thanks, Joe. All right, something that happens every 6 years when two dates land on the same calendar day. This year, President's Day, the third Monday in February, falls on the same day as Day of Remembrance, February 19th. Interestingly, both these days are connected here in the 208. First, President's Day. We've talked about this before, the presidential connection to Idaho. Okay, so let's break it down by the numbers. One would be Benjamin Harrison, the first president to visit Idaho while in office. He also made it a state. The number would be 3 would be the number of trees planted by presidents while they were here. The number 4 would be the number of presidents who have visited all 50 states while in office. Since Lyndon Johnson in 1964, every president had visited Idaho at least once while in office. That'd make it 8 straight until President Donald Trump broke that streak. Okay, so back to number 1. It was that first visit in Idaho's first year where Boise's capital city first made a first-person connection to the country's commander-in-chief. And as we learned in today's 208 Redial, a relatively unknown numbered street hasn't been the same since. There are 2 presidents who played a prominent role in Idaho's history. One, Abraham Lincoln, our 16th president, who created the Idaho Territory in 1863. 2, Benjamin Harrison, our 23rd president.
Yes, he signed the Idaho Admission Act on July 3rd, 1890.
And that made Idaho the 43rd state in the Union. Nearly 1 year later,
Spring of 1891, yeah.
President Harrison hit the road. Well, the rails anyway, on a grand tour of the country. A trip like no other president before him.
But he had a presidential train, and they went south and looped all the way up, and they made their way back through Idaho on the way home.
They must have been in a hurry to get home because
He spent a couple of hours here on the morning of May 8th.
Just a couple of hours? Yeah, but enough time for President Harrison to make a speech, to plant an oak tree on the Capitol grounds, and to leave quite an impression on the residents of Boise. So much so that shortly after that short visit, at the behest of Mr. Jeremiah Brumback, the city of Boise decided to rename a rather insignificant numbered street after the one-term president.
At that point, considering the development of the town and of the area, that was really kind of the outskirts.
In fact, on fire insurance maps of the day, it didn't even show up.
The 1893 map stopped at 16th Street.
But that is how 17th Street became Harrison Boulevard.
It wasn't until 1903 that we finally see the space and the location west of 16th Street show up on the map, and at that point it is designated as Harrison Boulevard.
It was supposed to be Boise's first planned community. They even planned the prices.
Houses had to cost between $2,500 and $5,000 if they were to be built on Harrison Boulevard.
Safe to say, it costs a bit more to live on Harrison Boulevard these days. It wasn't until 1910, when the median was added and the trees were planted, that Harrison became a true boulevard and a showpiece for Boise's North End.
In 1980, that was the year that they designated the entire street as a listing on the National Register of Historic Places. At that point, they really recognized it for its beauty and for the importance that it held within the community. And then 9 years later, in 1989, the city designated it as a historic district.
It all started with a president from the Midwest who had a soft spot affection for those of us out west.
It's important for residents of Idaho to remember that there were certain moments in history where Idaho played a part kind of in the national story.
Harrison's Capitol tree, by the way, was removed during the State House renovation back in 2010. It's not just Harrison. It's not just streets either. About 24 schools have names like Jefferson, Monroe, Washington, Reagan. 5 of Idaho's 44 counties share a name with former leaders of the free world: Adams, Jefferson, Lincoln, Madison, and Washington again. But let's take it back to the streets. Other presidents have left an impression in the city of trees, some without even stepping foot in the gem state. Okay, so in addition to Harrison in Boise's North End, there's Washington Street, and there could have been a haze if it weren't for a missing E. Near the North End, there's Jefferson Street and Madison Avenue on the west side. But it's on the bench where we see the highest number of hails to the chiefs, like Harding Street. Possibly a shout out to President Warren G., who visited Idaho in June 1923 to learn about irrigation on his Voyage of Understanding trip. However, Harding would not survive said voyage, dying suddenly that August. So perhaps it's fitting his street is now a dead end. The bench is also where you'll find Wilson and Jackson Streets, and where Hoover intersects with Roosevelt. That's one street with connections to 2 presidents from the same family. Teddy stopped by in 1903 and planted a tree on state capitol grounds. And Franklin, well, he gave a speech at the same capitol in 1937. All right, speaking of Roosevelt, this is intersection of President's Day and Day of Remembrance and its connection to the 208. So let's do that. On February 19th, 1942, President Franklin Roosevelt signed Executive Order 9066. And this gave the U.S. Army the authority to remove Japanese American civilians from military zones along the West Coast, while many of them were sent off to fight in World War II. Well, this wasn't the first time the federal government forcibly removed a collection of people from their homeland. And the practice of persecuting marginalized groups, well, that lives on today in some fashion. A couple of years ago, we met with a documentary filmmaker who wanted to remind people anti-Asian sentiment in the United States began well before December 7th, 1941. The bombing of Pearl Harbor pushed public sentiment toward Japanese Americans to a level never seen before. 10 weeks later, on February 19th, 1942, President Franklin Roosevelt signed Executive Order 9066. Authorizing the military to round up Japanese Americans and remove them from their homes along the West Coast. About 120,000 were sent to 10 different internment camps scattered from Arkansas to California. More than 9,000 were incarcerated in Idaho at the Minidoka Relocation Center.
The justification for the incarceration orders was that Japanese Americans were committing acts of espionage. The truth of the matter is that the military, through the help of the Federal Communications Commission, realized pretty quickly that none of that was true.
That truth, or the hiding of it, is the basis of a documentary by John Osaki, whose own parents were sent to an internment camp in Northern California. His father lived in San Francisco, a high schooler with a dog.
There was so much hatred directed towards Japanese following the bombing of Pearl Harbor that people considered his dog a Jap dog.
So when he was loaded onto a truck,
he literally had to sit there and watch his dog chase that truck for over a mile until it got too tired and it sat down the middle of the road and he never saw it again.
Learning about
Alternative Facts tells the story of the false narrative that led to this American tragedy.
We had the intelligence, we had the information, we knew that Japanese Americans were not a threat to national security, but decided to incarcerate them anyways.
The documentary highlights not just the ethnic,
but then you see the Japanese get there and they start creating really productive farms.
but the economic reasons behind the executive order.
And there is a lot of fear that Japanese Americans are going to take over the Central Valley.
They seized this as an opportunity to essentially take over their land.
Does it shock you how easily and how successful it went over?
It doesn't shock me. I think what we've tried to do with this film is just draw a straight line to how that playbook is still very successful today.
Donald Trump defending himself tonight, even comparing himself to FDR.
And it's something that I think we have to be vigilant about, and that real people suffer severe consequences when they get pulled into this political agenda for really power, right? It's really about people acquiring power in this country and using marginalized communities to do that.
If you create fear and demonize an entire group, we saw what that led to. And we're starting to head in a very similar direction.
That's really the lesson of the incarceration of Japanese Americans in World War II. And I think we just have to constantly talk about that, and that a lot of our history in this country is not pretty. And I think we have to be willing to confront that, or we're not going to make progress in addressing this, this dynamic.
We did that story a couple years ago before I learned to properly call it an incarceration camp, not an internment or relocation camp. That award-winning documentary was shown in Idaho for the first time in 2022, 80 years after the signing of 9066. Since then, it has spawned a full open-source curriculum on PBS. And next week, the film's going to be shown at what is, well, it's still known, but what used to be known as the Presidio in San Francisco. It was from there General John DeWitt put Executive Order 9066 into practice, sending thousands of Japanese Americans to be incarcerated at the Minidoka camp north of Twin Falls.
So here we go. What's expected in the next couple of days? We'll take you beyond that, even into the weekend, and the weekend is looking pretty good. Right now, if you take a look at our futurecast, here's the prediction of what's going to be taking place here. You can see only very light showers for later tonight, so I really don't expect much, but you can see some moving through. This is through 3 o'clock tomorrow morning, but very quickly. Not much in the way of showers moving on, as you notice that coming through. Not part of a major type storm. It's a storm that's breaking up, moving into the area. Finally, on Wednesday evening, that's probably about our last one through there. You can see the clouds start clearing up, and we start seeing a little more sunshine getting into Thursday and Friday. And by the way, as we look at this, storms will still keep temperatures around lower 50s to maybe some mid 50s. And then once we get the sunshine into the weekend, look at these temperatures. Why does it come back down? Well, we've got more rain, more storms coming our way beginning next week. So that brings those temperatures back down, which is pretty typical for the end of February. In fact, some of these temperatures around 48, 49 are pretty close to the average. So to take a look at the Boise forecast, breezy to windy conditions, I think, are the biggest part of this. Temperatures will be up around 50, getting to the mid 50s. There might be a light shower here and there into Tuesday and Wednesday. After that, we dry out until you see the rain showers that are coming in by next Monday. And that could even be a rain-snow mix if they happen to hit us very early in the morning. So those 50s and sunshine toward the end of the week. Look forward to that.
All right, several people texted in to say there's no simple answer to this immigration issue, like Jose in Caldwell, who said, it isn't a black and white issue. It isn't just they're illegals. They're people caught in an impossible situation. If they have no avenue to obtain legal documentation and their employers have no way to obtain legal workers, how do they get from farm to table? Moving on to the issue of bullying in schools, Vanderwater thinks the schools already have capabilities to police bullying, but not apparently to deal with inappropriate library content. Voters need to pay attention, says Jack in Boise. This one is a good one. I'm a school bus driver, and I can tell you firsthand, bullying happens every day. As we're mandated to report any bullying the same day, that is our part in the system. The school takes over and investigates. There's a definition of bullying by law, says R in Nampa. I don't think that another bill will help. The parents need to be more involved with their children and with the schools. Legislation will not solve the problem. Somebody else pointed out cave kids probably got bullied. Space kids will probably bully each other. But there is a way to kind of address it and maybe see if you can kind of at least slow it down, if not stop it entirely. It's ironic they want to stop bullying in schools when they do it in legislation. Guess they don't recognize it in adults. And thinks that's sad. We'll be back in tomorrow. We'll see you then.